What if everything you knew about King Arthur was a lie? Not just a harmless fairy tale, but a carefully constructed fiction, a smokescreen thrown up by a kingdom so desperate for a hero that it buried the truth so deep even history forgot to dig. What if the real Arthur wasn't a king in shining armor, but a warlord so brutal, so effective, that the very Britain he saved from annihilation spent the next 1,000 years trying to erase his name from the record books, replacing his blood-soaked reality with a story of chivalry and magic to make the birth of a nation palatable? Close your eyes and imagine the silence of a cold, wet hilltop in the dark. You are not in a grand castle with tapestries and feasting halls. You are standing in a timber fortress, the air thick with the smell of smoke, unwashed wool, and the coppery tang of old blood. Below you, the valleys of Britain stretch into darkness. It is the year 500 and something after the birth of Christ, but the calendar means nothing anymore. Rome, the great empire that once brought roads, walls, and order to this island, has crumbled to dust. Her legions sailed away decades ago, leaving behind a people who had forgotten how to be free. Now, from the east, new terrors arrive on the tide. Saxon warriors, their boats like splinters of darkness on the sea, are carving out kingdoms with fire and sword. The native Britons, the descendants of those who once called themselves Romans, are being pushed to the edges of their own land, into the mountainous west, into the mist-shrouded north, and across the sea to a place they will call Brittany. They are a people watching their world end. They are losing. And in this moment of absolute desperation, when extinction is not a fear, but a probability, one man rises. But he is not a king. He is a battle leader. His name is not a symbol of unity. It is a curse to his enemies. He is the man Britain tried to hide. His name is Arthur. If this journey has stirred your curiosity, show it. Like to honor the story. Share it to awaken others. And subscribe to walk with us through every truth that history, time, or legend has tried to hide. Turn on the bell and never miss the next tale waiting in the shadows.
Uncovered ancient history.
To understand why the real Arthur was buried so deep, we have to understand the world that created him. It was a world without hope. Think of modern London, a city of glass and steel, of constant noise and light. Now strip it away. No buildings, no roads, no law. The Roman withdrawal from Britain was not an event, it was a slow, agonizing collapse. For 400 years, Britain had been a Roman province. The elite in cities like Londinium and Eboracum and what we call York wore togas, spoke Latin, and paid taxes to an emperor far away. They built villas with heated floors and bathhouses. They lived in a world that felt permanent. Then, around the year 410, the legions left. The empire needed them to defend the heartland from barbarian invasions. The Romano-British were told, effectively, to look after themselves. And into this power vacuum poured the Saxons. They were not one people, but a collection of tribes from what is now Germany and Denmark. They came first as mercenaries, hired by foolish British leaders to fight other British leaders. Then they came as settlers. Then they came as conquerors. The historical record for this period is almost silent. We have one primary source, a monk named Gildas, writing perhaps 50 to 100 years after Arthur would have lived. Gildas is not a historian. He is an angry preacher. He looks back at this time of collapse and sees the wrath of God. He tells us that the Britons, terrified by the Saxon onslaught, sent a desperate letter to a Roman general, a final, pathetic plea. The barbarians drive us to the sea drives us back to the barbarians. Between these two modes of death, we are either slaughtered or drowned. The Romans did not come. It was in this darkness, Gildas tells us, that a future leader emerged. But he does not name Arthur. He names a man called Ambrosius Aurelianus, a gentleman of Roman stock who rallied the shattered Britons and, in a series of desperate battles, stemmed the tide. It is in the gap between Gildas's sermon and the later, more famous legends that our real Arthur must be found. He is the ghost in the war machine, the name too dangerous to speak, the warlord who finished what Ambrosius started, and whose shadow was so long that the kings who came after him needed to shrink it, to tame it, to turn a general into a fairy tale. So who was the man behind the myth? To find him, we have to look not at the round tables and the questing knights, but at the one place where history and legend collide with a hard, sharp edge, the battlefield. There are 12 battles listed in a 9th century Latin text called the Historia Brittonum, or the History of the Britons. This is our earliest detailed account of Arthur, written 300 years after he would have lived. The author, a Welsh monk named Nennius, presents a list of battles culminating in a single decisive conflict. Forget the sword in the stone, forget the Lady of the Lake. This Arthur is not a king. He is described as a dux bellorum, a duke of battles. He is a war leader, a commander hired by the petty kings of Britain to unite them against a common foe. Nennius tells us that in these 12 battles, Arthur fought alongside the kings, but he was the one who carried the image of the Virgin Mary on his shoulders, a Christian standard that would have struck fear into the hearts of the pagan Saxons. The battles are listed in strange, often unidentifiable places. Arthur fought on the River Glyn, on the River Douglas, in the region of Lindsey, and on the River Bassus. Then Nennius mentions a battle at a forest called Celidon, what we now call the Caledonian Forest in Scotland. These are not skirmishes in a single kingdom. They are a campaign across the entire length of Britain, from the lowlands of Scotland to the south coast. This was not the work of a local chieftain. This was a mobile, strategic war machine. The real Arthur, if we are to believe the scant evidence, was a professional soldier in an age of desperate amateurs. He was a man who understood logistics, who could move a war band of heavily armed cavalry hundreds of miles across a broken land, who could bring together the feuding British kings and force them to cooperate. He was likely not born to a throne. He earned his authority through the only currency that mattered in the 5th century, victory. And victory was bloody. This was not the chivalric combat of later stories. This was total war. The Saxon victory at a place called Aylesford, or the siege of Mount Badon, which is the 12th and most important battle on Nennius's list, would have been a slaughter. The great victory that bought a generation of peace dissolved into a generation of internal strife. The real Arthur did not fall to a foreign invader. He fell to the very British kings he had fought to protect. The dream of a united Britain died with him on that battlefield. And after his death, the Saxon tide resumed, slowly, inexorably. Within 100 years of Camlann, most of lowland Britain had become England, the land of the Angles. The Britons were pushed into Wales and Cornwall. Their language, their culture, their very identity became a remnant, a memory. And in that memory, the figure of Arthur became dangerous. He was not just a hero, he was a symbol of failure. He was a reminder that the Britons had been given a champion, a chance, and they had thrown it away through infighting. The kings who came after, the rulers of the small, struggling Welsh kingdoms, did not want to celebrate a warlord whose story ended in civil war. They wanted a unifying symbol, a prophecy. So they began to change him. They began to hide the real Arthur behind a veil of myth. The real Arthur was too dangerous to remember. So they did something more effective. They replaced him. The question is, now that you know who he really was, will you let him remain buried? Or is it time to pull the sword from the stone of history and see, for the first time, the face of the man who saved a nation, and the nation that erased him?